Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the Consulting Edge Podcast.
Thank you, Dan. I'm honored to be here.
Well, we're honored to have you. Today, our guest is Sarah Marshall. Sarah has a distinguished career with stops at Sun Microsystems, Logitech, and Google, and some very senior roles. She's an operations expert and runs Operations Architect. So she's a very successful consultant with a great practice. And we want to get some insights from you today, Sarah. Um, so first of all, starting with your background, like I said, some very impressive positions that you've held, very large organizations. I'm curious how that perspective of seeing the operations in very large organizations like that has translated into your perspective on smaller organizations and growing them. I know your target is people running, say, 5 million, 20 people, helping them grow to 15 million, 50 people. So
Yep.
would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. So I was different than most consultants who work for the big firms, et cetera. I I earned my stripes coming up through the ranks of being in-house and developing my skills in-house. And I started out as a design engineer, but moved quickly into running operations, manufacturing, et cetera. And there was a kind of a natural transition when I moved out of biotech into Sun to do transformational work. So then I spent many years in the transformational world and eventually moved into more of a strategist and working in organizations to build out the entire operational strategy, and ended my what I'll call the enterprise leg of my career at Google as head of strategy and operations and search. In essence, building strategy, tying strategy to execution, and ensuring that the executive team was fully filled in terms of intelligence, with fresh intelligence all the time so that they can make the best possible decisions. And when I exited my enterprise leg of my career, what really was sitting with me is these things that we were doing to optimize operations and in large enterprise industry really translated well to smaller organizations, mid-size, smaller, as you were indicating, anything from 50 on up, where things start to get complex, that the concepts of these things fit well with those organizations, but most of those organizations can't afford the big consulting firms to come in
Right.
and do that work. So I wanted to simplify that to make the framework easy to use in smaller organizations and applicable to smaller organizations. And that's what I spent time doing as I set up my consultancy. And so I'm sure we're going to get into it. That what it means is I've been in multiple industries, I've been in multiple operational positions and seen every angle of it. And have a very clear and opinionated concept about how to bring change into the operational aspects of an organization. And I'm bringing all that to bear for smaller organizations.
Well, let's talk about change. That brings up my next question. One of the ways you frame strategy is that the strategy isn't wrong and the people aren't failing. The structure is broken. What's your
Yep.
tell for determining that it's the structure and not the leadership or the people who are trying to execute? How do you
The
determine that?
the number one easy way to test that is to go through the strategy and what the objectives of the strategy are and see how much work is stacking up against those objectives. And there's always a gap. There always will. Even at the most tightly run organizations, there's going to be 10, maybe 15% of activities that are being focused elsewhere for good reasons. However, most companies sit at least 70, or I'm sorry, 30% of the activities that they're doing are not related to delivering value to the strategy, and oftentimes a lot more. So first thing I do is I look at their strategy, what they're trying to accomplish, and look at what they're actually doing and make a call on how far off they are.
Yeah, that's a fantastic approach. Um, so I'm curious on that 30%. those are things obviously that have to be done, even though they're not directly driving towards the value that the company wants to generate. Are you seeing any trends with your clients in terms of technology that they're using or that you're using to kind of smooth through that? I mean, as AI's got to be coming into play there, I would assume.
Yeah, so large language models are going to continue to occupy a more and more important aspect in how we're doing things. I mean, if you talk to folks that build large language models, they'll say we've progressed so far, the costs have come down, the applications are much more effective. But in my experience talking with folks out there, because I talk with operations leaders every week, is that there is still a gap between the promise of AI and where we're going. Now that gap is closing quickly, and it's getting better, and there's some great applications. But AI is not the only technology out there that we are leveraging. We have blockchain as a critical part of potentially for supply chain and for finance. There's robotic automation within activities that are continuously kind of similar. You can just automate them and get them kind of knocked out and not have to have a lot of human contact. There's all of the cloud aspects. There's cloud itself. There's edge compute. There's the 5G networking, and et cetera. All those come into play in terms of what's going to make an organization much more productive and optimize the improvement. So when you're considering your technology, all of those need to be considered. However, when I'm talking to business leaders, I always say, well, let's start with the problem you're trying to solve. And those technologies may be the right answer, but we need to validate that against other alternatives.
Right. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So, I completely agree with you. The gap between what AI can do and what companies are doing with it is closing rapidly. One of the interesting things is how rapidly AI is maturing and changing as well. So what our vision is today, a year from now, we may be doing things that we never even thought about doing with AI. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out along with the rest of the technologies that you're describing. Everything is rapidly changing.
My experience from what I'm using and what I'm seeing and folks I'm talking to is that I've never experienced a technology that is maturing as fast as large language models are. In fact, I'm writing an article right now about what the trends are. How is it going to impact you in various aspects of within your organization, how productivity, and then all the other things it's going to occupy. So I absolutely agree. I see solidifying trends so much faster than I've seen any other technology introduction. And I've seen them all over the years.
I'm sure.
So,
me too.
Yeah.
Well, let's get back to your framework. So you start with the inside ops diagnostics, is that correct?
Yes. So let's start in a place that's a little more fundamental. What do operations people do? Because it's really easy to understand what
they operate.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's a chief product officer delivers products, chief revenue officer brings in the revenue, chief financial officer manages the finance for long-term health of the organization. What does an operations person do? And the simple way I can put it is, we operations people, we reduce friction. That's our job, is we're in essence grout. And so we hold things together, and if we are doing our job well, then nobody talks about it, because you're not talking about operations, you're talking about other big things for the organization. So it's an interesting place to occupy, because nobody can really nail down exactly what that means, because it's bespoke to every organization. And the friction is going to be different for each organization at different times. So getting back to the framework, what I'm attempting to do with my framework is two things. The assumption, or the underlying hypothesis that I'm operating on, is we are in a time of continuous disruption. When I started in industry, disruptions would happen every couple of years or maybe once a year. We'd throw up a heroic effort, we'd knock it down, everybody would be burnt out, and we'd move on. What's happening today is we're seeing those kinds of disruptions 3 to 5 times a year for most companies. And so you can't treat it like it's something unusual. You have to treat it like it's a normal way of doing business. So my structure, my framework that I've developed is designed to do 2 things. The first is to reduce the distance between strategy and execution. So there's clear signaling between execution to strategy, strategy to execution. And as things shift on either side, those 2 things look like the same thing, even though they are conceived of and operated by very different kinds of people. So that's piece 1. Piece 2 is to build in disciplines and practices to reduce the recovery time from disruption to back to an operating norm. So reducing the heroic efforts, reducing the time to respond to it, which means reducing the time to decide what you're going to do, reducing the time to plan for it, and then get right into execution, because execution is execution, and it goes as fast as you can build it. So that's the idea, is I'm trying to do those 2 things very quickly. One is ensure that strategy and execution are tightly tied, and 2 is to build that recovery path very quickly.
Awesome. So zooming out a little bit on our focus here, what are you seeing that's working well in businesses right now, especially around technology? Because obviously that's my focus, technology and AI. But what are you seeing that's working well right now, and what kind of frustrations are people running into? Are you seeing any consistent trends there?
The number one trend I'm seeing for organizations outside the technology world or even the operational practices is that organization leaders have come to terms with that they need to be highly flexible. So they're looking for, instead of heavy fixes, large platforms, et cetera, where we're just optimizing performance in a stable environment, they're recognizing that they need to remain extremely flexible, which operates at several levels. One is the leadership team needs to be always looking for what's next coming at them and being able to respond to it very quickly. The workforce and the culture is designed to be adaptive rather than stable. And the technology, we'll just start with general workflow and process all the way down to technology, is being built out at the lightest possible version. So it makes being an operations geek like myself a much more sophisticated level of performance requirements than ever I've experienced in the past, because we have to figure out not just ways to make the organization perform well, but also set it up to flex and move into whatever next phase you need to go into.
Interesting. So tell me, what industries are you focusing on right now?
You would expect from my background that I would be completely focused on tech industry, hardware, software, biotech, et cetera. And I do have some of that in my portfolio. But what's interesting, and I've spent a lot of time, and I'm going to back up a little bit and say, I'm in the process of writing a book about how to do this. And it's weeks to maybe 2 months before I publish. Depends on how fast I finalize my edits. But the book I'm writing, I wanted to validate that what I proposed works anywhere. And so I have been talking to operations leaders, in the 10s to 20s every week, understanding where they're at, how my framework might apply to them or not apply to them. And what I found is that by and large, in its simplest form, it's applicable anywhere. So I also have a publisher in my portfolio. I have a couple of nonprofits. It fits anywhere. So what I found is that while my credentials put me directly in the tech world and in the Silicon Valley kind of framework, I can actually do this work anywhere.
It makes sense. I mean, most of it is completely transferable. other than
Yes,
specific industry knowledge, which your clients have already. So,
especially at the business ops level where we're just focusing on governance to make the organization work well, that is agnostic to anything. When you get into functions, it gets a little more tricky.
so you've worked with some companies that have gone through a merger or acquisition also, correct?
Oh, yes. Yes.
So what do you see there? What's the biggest mistake you see companies make in the first 90 days after a transaction like that?
The number one thing is it's going to be odd because it's not how to integrate the technology footprint, et cetera, et cetera. It is not addressing the cultural differences between the organizations. And I participated in multiple acquisitions where we were doing the work to bring the folks in, et cetera. And what stands out for me is if that cultural difference isn't addressed immediately, no matter what you do tactically to bring the new organization into the fold, it's always going to be a kind of an oil and water kind of mix.
Mhm.
So I am all about, first thing I focus on is ensuring everybody's on the same page for the culture that they're coming into.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I kind of thought you were going to say that.
Oh,
Yeah, so I've been through a few acquisitions myself, and that's always the biggest challenge is just merging the cultures and getting people kind of in the same mindset and the same way of working with each other and how they think about things.
yeah,
And you only want that so much. You don't want it to be you want people to bring their unique talents, skills, and perspectives. So that's got to be managed, I would imagine.
absolutely. And you need to respect that they come from a culture that operated in a certain way. And if you want them to operate differently, you have to bring them along to work in that new kind of environment. When I was at Google, we had so many acquisitions happening all the time. And the number one thing I would see is that having to build that bridge because Google culture is extraordinarily unique to any other place I've ever worked. Bringing those people into the Google culture and understanding their place in it and the power they had in that culture.
That must have been a fascinating experience, though. I can
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to circle us back to AI.
Okay.
We talked about the gap between the capabilities and what people are actually executing on. Do you have any specifics that you can think of on where you see gaps like that you could share with
Yep.
us?
Yep. So there's let's start personal and then work out for personal into organization.
Perfect.
So personally, you and I are both we're probably on some large language model all day long doing things. I think one of the biggest mistakes that most, especially new to it users do is they treat these large language models like search. They type in a request or whatever, and they get a response, and they think they're good to go. In truth, because large language models operate on probability, they are giving you their best guess of an answer. Now, they're very good at understanding your needs or coming to understand your needs and then looking at the environment and trying to answer it for you. But if you come in instead of just typing in a request with a set of requirements that says, here's your boundaries, here's what you need to be looking at, here's what you need to scour, here's the information that I need from that. And by the way, I not only want you to give me that information, I want you to give me a quality check on the information that's coming in. Is it confirmed? It looks like you've seen this somewhere and you are giving me exact wording. Is it inferred? It's not quite exact wording, but you're putting together multiple sources and you're coming to a conclusion based on the several sources that you're looking at. Or are you just speculating? Are you going off and hallucinating an answer because it's the kind of the average everything you looked at? And so I not only build a set of requirements, I build a quality check on the back end to make sure that everything that I'm getting can make sense. I also make it give me all the sources for the information so I can go look at it myself.
That's important. That's very important.
So
Well,
personal productivity is critical, is that you don't treat this like a search engine. You treat it like an assistant that needs a lot of guidance.
Look, let me touch on that before we move on to your experience with your clients and the external world from your personal usage, because you're spot on. And I have two takeaways from that. I like to call it the art of the prompt. The biggest skill you can learn with AI is how to articulate the appropriate prompt with all of the things you just described. The second thing is, I find that when I go to one of these LLMs and I'm running scenarios about something, I always ask it after it provides a response to me, what's wrong with that? Or what's the risk to it? Or some other question to point out the negatives, because it has a habit of being very rosy and positive about, oh, hey, here's what you can do. And you've got to make sure that you're really considering all aspects of it, all risk and all benefits.
Yes, and even sometimes if I want to be really rigorous, I'll use the same prompts on multiple LLM engines, and then I'll switch them and say, "This is a response I got from elsewhere. Tell me what's wrong with it." Mm-hmm. And that's always really interesting, because then
yeah. Do you think the LLMs have a competitive backbone to them?
What I am clear about is that each LLM will paint rosy the things it wants to paint rosy, and so you have to figure that out as you go. Where is that prompt leading you that you don't want to be led to, and pull back from it. I'm in the process of writing an article on this very topic, personal productivity, organizational productivity, et cetera. And I wrote it, and then I fed it into one of my large language models, and I say, tell me where I'm wrong in my assumptions here. And it started painting a rosy picture of cost reductions, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, okay, I understand that somebody told you to say that,
right?
But that's not accurate, given the anecdotal information I've been getting. So I always go into my prompts with a fair degree of skepticism, which I'm always going to have. You have to figure out where the prejudices of your large language model lie.
That's very smart. I had an executive early in my career, many decades ago, tell me that you always have to look at the downside of a decision that you're making. And that what you're describing is the AI version of looking at the downside.
Yep.
And so let's shift to the external view. As you work with your clients, what are you seeing in terms of gaps in industry about how they're applying AI and where their best opportunities are?
So a year ago, I was seeing AI being applied everywhere, and oftentimes to poor results. What I'm seeing as a kind of a narrowing trend over this last year is there's some real applications where AI has been very valuable. I'll call it in finding the needle in the haystack. Sales lead analysis, talent candidate analysis, anywhere where there's a big, broad set of data from disparate sources. Large language models have become pretty good at analyzing that. Still, you have to build a lot of guardrails into what they're looking at, and then bring a fair amount of skepticism. I would say that for everything that I'm seeing right now in those arenas where large language model applications are solidifying, we still need a human in the loop. I suspect in not much longer, maybe in the next 6 months, there will be applications where you can pull, what do they call it now, human above the loop, where you don't have to be looking at every decision, but you need to monitor it for trends and et cetera. I suspect that these areas where I've just described are going to become very good at what they do and deliver. And I'm sure you're seeing some of that results now, or maybe even building some of it. But that's where I'm seeing a lot of really good work coming to the fore. Another area that I think is super empowering is in terms of building our custom agents and vibe coding, is that it's allowing us non-believer non-coders into the mix to build our own custom capabilities. The upside is we can build stuff really fast that works for specific things we need. The downside is eventually it will break, and that means that you'll probably need somebody with more expertise to come understand what's breaking it. And the other thing is that most people aren't thinking about the underlying infrastructure required to manage it, whether they're pulling their large language model from the outside or they're building something in-house, that there is a fair cost to using large language models still. Even though the costs have come down some, they're still substantial, and there's a fair amount of environmental impact from delivering this capability. When I was still in search in Google, I was there when we built the first large language model into the stack, and I was asked to do an analysis for what the impacts were going to be. The one thing that stood out for me that was shocking and breathtaking to me is the difference between doing the memory requirements for a search versus a large language model prompt is 16 times the level of a search. So that tells you where at least we were at a couple of years ago in memory requirements. It's come down a bit. It hasn't come down at all completely. It's still a large gap, but it's a hog in terms of, and so it doesn't. Another thing people are looking at is, rightfully so, companies are looking at how people are going to be engaged. Does it eliminate their job? Does it change their job? Or is it just something that operates in parallel with their work? And so that's affecting people on a personal level. If my job goes away because AI has replaced it, that's a thing. But there's some big decisions for executives to make in terms of, in the long run, how are they going to reconfigure their organizations to bring it in, and how are they going to manage the costs for it? Because certainly today, you cannot replace a human being with a large language model and save money. We're just not there yet. That will happen eventually. It's on that trend to get there. But today, you can't just do a one-to-one replacement and then save money.
Yeah, that's a big concern, and I'd like to take the rosy perspective on that AI is ultimately going to expand the economy and benefit everybody. But there's going to be disruption and displacement in the meantime, and it's going to be interesting to see how that's managed.
It's like cars replacing horses.
Right.
Productivity went up, our ability to travel went up, etc. But there was a cost for those folks in the interim that had to move from making buggy whips to making tires or whatever else.
One last question. What about regulatory impact? I know that I've seen a couple things going on that are restricting, whether they intend to or not, it's going to restrict the use of AI for certain things, primarily decision-making in the financial world. Are you seeing a regulatory impact out there? And what do you think the trend's going to be with that?
So I think there's a couple of things going on. Externally, it's what are the impacts to cities and towns from the shift to building out these data centers and the power requirements and all that. That's impacting broadly society without seeing the real benefit yet. So there's probably pluses and minuses to what regulations are going to do. Right now, it's fairly unregulated, and people are battling it town to town, city to city. Right. But I suspect over the next few years that there will be some regulations in that environment. I think also, as you mentioned, in specific applications, managing PII, personal information, financials, anything that is kind of mission critical, financials, air traffic control, et cetera, the regulations and AI applications are definitely going to rub against each other. And there was one other area I was thinking of.
Probably
completely lost it. I'm sorry?
Healthcare?
Oh, healthcare. Healthcare is another one, because that has both aspects. It has that personal protected information, but it's also, if you're using an AI tool to start your diagnosis, you definitely want an expert human being in that loop to call BS on it if it's not giving good results. I suspect we'll see some regulations in that arena as well.
Yeah, I imagine that there's a collision course there. That's an area that people are touting, that AI is so good at the diagnostics and
You saw my face.
but we'll see. Well, listen, we're out of time. I really appreciate you joining us. It's a fascinating call. Really appreciate your insights. If people want to do business with you or check into your website, how can they reach you, Sarah?
Yeah, I'm easy to reach at Operations Architect. It's HTTP operations-architect.com. And you can reach out to me directly through my website, or you can schedule time with me.
Perfect. Well, thank you again so much. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I wish we had more time, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Well, thank you, Dan. This was awesome. I really appreciated the conversation.
Thank you.